The moment I realized my wife wasn't just lying to me, but using our children as cover, something inside me went cold. I didn't scream. I didn't confront her. I sat there, staring at a screen, and decided that if you cheat on your wife with mine, I will burn your life to the ground. If you've ever been betrayed by someone you trusted with your entire life, you'll understand this story. Make sure you're subscribed, because some lines, once crossed, don't get forgiven. They get remembered. I used to think betrayal would feel loud, explosive, like a door slammed or a glass shattered. But the truth is, betrayal is quiet. It sneaks into your life disguised as routine. A change in schedule. A shrug where there used to be eye contact. A lie told so casually it almost sounds like the truth. Back in the early 2000s, my life looked normal from the outside. 2 kids, 4 and 6 years old. A modest house. A wife who worked part-time. The kind of life people stop questioning because it looks settled. But kids notice things adults miss. At first, it was small comments. Mom took us to Grandma's again. Grandpa made pancakes. We stayed there a long time. Her parents lived 90 minutes away. Not across town. Not convenient. Yet somehow, the kids were spending the day there too, sometimes 3 times a week. I remember the first time it really hit me. We were sitting at the dinner table. My son was swinging his legs under the chair, not even looking up, when he said, "Mom drives a lot." Just like that.
No accusation.
No drama. Just a fact. That night, I asked her casually, "Hey, the kids say you've been going to your parents' place a lot lately." She didn't even hesitate. "Oh yeah. They like being there. It's easier when I'm working." The words came out smooth. Too smooth. See, my wife was a lot of things, but a good liar wasn't one of them. When she lied, she talked faster, blinked more, avoided details. And that night, she gave me nothing but details. That's when I knew. So I stopped asking questions. And I started watching. I tracked the mileage on her car the same way you might track your weight when you're afraid of what you'll see, but you need to know anyway. Every week, the number climbed. 400 extra miles. Every single week. There was no explanation for that.
No errands.
No family visits. No part-time job commute. Just miles. That's when the dread set in. The kind that presses on your chest at night. That keeps you awake, staring at the ceiling, replaying every moment from the last few months, wondering when it started, and how stupid you must have been to miss it. Then came the sticky note. It was just sitting there. On the desk. Right next to the computer. Her AOL password. I remember standing there, staring at it, my heart pounding like I was about to commit a crime. I told myself I shouldn't. I told myself if I looked, there'd be no going back. But here's the thing about suspicion, it doesn't fade. It grows. So I logged in. The inbox loaded slowly, 1 line at a time. And there it was. Emails between her and her college best friend. Laughing. Joking. Confessing. Talking openly about how she was regularly sleeping with an ex-boyfriend from high school.
No guilt. No remorse.
Just details. And then the part that made my stomach turn. She mocked his wife. Joked about how she'd gotten fat after having kids. I remember gripping the mouse so hard my hand hurt. This wasn't a mistake. This wasn't a moment of weakness. This was contempt. I printed everything. Every email. Every timestamp. Then I hid them. And I sat there in silence, listening to the hum of the computer fan, feeling something inside me shift permanently. I didn't cry. I felt focused. I still needed proof. Details. Reality. So I called a friend of mine. He was a cop. I told him what was going on, and he gave me a number. A private investigator. Ron. Ron didn't ask many questions. He didn't judge. He just listened. A week later, he handed me a report that felt heavier than paper ever should. Photos. Dates. Times. Locations. My wife would drop the kids at her parents'. Meet the guy for lunch. Go to a dumpy motel for a few hours. Then pick the kids up and come home like nothing happened. Over. And over. And over. I stared at one of the photos for a long time. Her car. Parked outside that motel. And that's when I made a decision. I would not scream. I would not beg. I would not fight. Because I grew up watching my parents destroy each other over infidelity, and it ruined everything. I wasn't going to let history repeat itself. I hired a divorce lawyer. And then I asked Ron one more question. Can you find out who this guy is? Ron smiled. And that smile told me everything was about to change. Because once I learned who he was, I realized my wife hadn't just betrayed me. She'd handed me the leverage to end another man's entire life. Ron was efficient in a way that felt almost surgical. 2 days after I asked him to dig into the guy's life, he called me and said, "Sit down. You're going to want to hear this." I remember lowering myself into the kitchen chair slowly, like my body already knew the weight that was coming. His name was Bob. That alone hit harder than it should have, because once someone has a name, they stop being a shadow. They become real. Tangible. Punchable. Bob was married. 3 kids. Lived in a nice house. And then Ron dropped the detail that made my jaw tighten. Bob worked as a vice president of sales for his father-in-law's company. I stared at the wall while Ron talked, my mind already racing 10 steps ahead. So let me get this straight. This guy was cheating on his wife. With my wife. While living in a house owned by his in-laws. And earning his paycheck from his wife's family. The audacity was breathtaking. But here's the thing no one tells you about moments like this. Knowing the truth doesn't bring relief. It brings pressure. Because once you know, you have to decide who you're going to be. For weeks, I lived 2 lives. On the outside, I was calm, polite, civil. I still made dinner. Still helped with homework. Still asked my wife how her day was. And every time she lied to my face, I felt it like a physical insult. Inside, though, I was unraveling. I couldn't sleep. I replayed conversations in my head, wondering how long she'd been laughing at me behind my back. I imagined Bob, his hands on her, his mouth saying things that used to be mine to say. And then I imagined his wife. A woman who had no idea she was being mocked by 2 people she trusted. That thought gnawed at me. My lawyer told me something important during one of our meetings. Infidelity won't really matter much in your divorce proceedings, he said. Not legally. I nodded. I wasn't doing this for court. I was doing this for closure. So I had the papers drawn up. Clean. Efficient. No drama. And then I made sure the timing was perfect. The day my wife was served at her workplace, blindsided in front of her coworkers, I felt nothing.
No joy. No satisfaction.
Just inevitability. But that wasn't the real moment. The real moment was happening across town. Ron had agreed to meet Bob's wife. He showed her everything. The photos. The dates. The motel. The emails. Ron told me later that she barely spoke while she looked through the evidence. Her hands shook. Her face went pale. And then she asked one question. How long? That's the moment I picture sometimes when I can't sleep. Because that question, that single word, ends marriages. What happened next wasn't something I orchestrated. I didn't need to. Bob's wife did what anyone with a spine and a sense of self-preservation would do. She cleaned out their joint bank account, took the kids, and left. By the time Bob realized what was happening, it was already too late. Her father found out. And let me tell you, there's nothing quite like a disappointed father-in-law who also happens to be your boss. Bob was fired. No warning.
No severance.
And because his in-laws owned the house he lived in, he was evicted. In 1 week, Bob lost his job, his home, and his family. And that's when things got ugly. Public records don't capture emotion, but they hint at it. Police reports. Restraining orders. Court filings. Bob showed up at the house one night, furious, demanding answers. Words were exchanged. Voices raised. Her brother stepped in. Bob left with a broken nose. After that, it was a spiral. More police calls. More reports. Criminal charges. Jail time. I read those documents like a man reading the weather forecast after already surviving the storm. Meanwhile, my life was quiet. My wife cried, begged, apologized. But it felt rehearsed. Like regret that only arrived once consequences did. We split custody. I kept my distance. I didn't trash her to the kids. I didn't poison them against her. Because revenge doesn't require cruelty to innocence. And then one day it was over. The divorce finalized. The dust settled. Bob disappeared.
No social media. No linkage. No trace.
Last I heard, he'd left the state. His ex-wife stayed. Took over her dad's company after he retired. Built something stable from the wreckage. As for me, I didn't feel victorious. I felt calm. Like a knot I'd been carrying for years had finally loosened. Because the truth is, I didn't destroy Bob's life out of anger. I did it because betrayal demands consequences. There's a moment in every revenge story that people imagine as explosive. Yelling. Confrontation. That cinematic aha, where everything clicks at once. But for me, the turning point was quiet. It came late one night, after the kids were asleep, after the house had settled into that deep hollow silence that only comes when something is already dead but still standing. I was sitting at the kitchen table, a single light on, staring at Ron's report spread out in front of me like pieces of a puzzle I already knew how to solve. And that's when it hit me. I wasn't powerless. I never had been. I'd spent weeks feeling like a victim, like things were happening to me. Like my life had been hijacked by two selfish people who didn't care who they hurt. But suddenly, I saw the situation for what it really was. They had taken risks. They had left trails. And they had underestimated me. That realization didn't make me angry. It made me precise. See, real revenge isn't loud. It isn't impulsive. It's patient. It's knowing when to move, and when to let gravity do the work for you. I thought about my parents. About the screaming matches. The slammed doors. The way everyone lost in the chaos. I promised myself I wouldn't repeat that pattern. So instead of confronting my wife, I observed her. The way she avoided my eyes. The way she suddenly became overly affectionate on certain days. The way she'd flinch when the phone rang unexpectedly. Guilt has a smell. Once you notice it, you can't unnotice it. Every night, while she slept beside me, I planned. Not revenge in the cartoonish sense. But outcomes. What did I want? I wanted my kids protected. I wanted my dignity intact. And I wanted the truth exposed, without me having to become the villain. That's when Ron became more than a PI. He became a shield. Everything went through him.
No emotional outbursts. No reckless moves.
Just documentation. Evidence is power, but only if you know when to use it. I asked Ron to make extra copies of everything. Why? He asked. In case someone tries to lie, I said. And that's when he nodded, like he understood exactly the kind of man I was. The night before my wife was served, I didn't sleep. Not because I was nervous, but because I felt something close to peace. The next day was choreography. Divorce papers delivered at her workplace, public, undeniable, impossible to spin. And at the same time, Bob's wife receiving the truth in a calm, controlled setting.
No threats. No demands.
Just reality. That's the thing people miss about revenge. The best kind doesn't require you to do much. You just remove the lies holding everything together, and let it collapse under its own weight. After that, I stepped back. I didn't call Bob. I didn't message him. I didn't gloat. I watched from a distance as his life unraveled. And every time I felt a flicker of doubt, every time a voice in my head whispered maybe this is too much, I remembered the emails. The laughter. The mockery. The motel rooms. I remembered my kids talking about grandma's house like it was normal. That's when the doubt vanished. Because this wasn't revenge fueled by rage. It was accountability delivered with precision. And the strangest part? By the time Bob's world fully collapsed, I barely thought about him at all. Because the real aftermath, the part no one talks about, is what happens after the revenge is complete. And next I'll tell you what it actually felt like to walk away. Knowing I'd ended a man's entire life without ever raising my voice. People imagine revenge as a moment. A single cinematic instant where the villain realizes they've lost. But in real life, revenge is a process, and the execution doesn't feel like fireworks. It feels like silence. By the time Bob understood what had happened, everything that defined his life was already gone. His job, terminated quietly, efficiently, without appeal. His home, no longer his. His family, vanished overnight. There was no dramatic showdown where he yelled my name or demanded answers. Because he never knew who I was. And that's what makes it devastating. Bob tried to fight it. The court records show motions filed in anger, arguments that went nowhere, desperate attempts to regain control of a narrative that no longer belonged to him. He showed up at his former house, fueled by a mix of panic and entitlement. That's when the illusion finally shattered. When her brother stepped in. When his nose broke. When police lights painted the street in red and blue. That's when Bob stopped being a man who thought he could juggle two lives. And started becoming a cautionary tale. Meanwhile, my world was shrinking, in a good way. I simplified everything. I stopped engaging with my ex-wife unless it involved the kids. I stopped asking why. I stopped replaying the past. She tried to pull me into conversations about guilt, regret, explanations. I refused. Closure doesn't come from understanding betrayal. It comes from outgrowing it. The kids adjusted better than I expected. Because kids don't need perfect parents. They need stable ones. Years passed. Bob faded into obscurity. No online footprint. No professional presence. Just gone. His ex-wife stayed. She worked for her father's company, learned the business, took over when he retired. I heard she did well. That mattered to me more than Bob's downfall ever did. Because fairness isn't about destruction. It's about balance. As for me, I moved on. I didn't carry hatred with me. I didn't tell this story for sympathy. I tell it because people think being the bigger person means swallowing disrespect. It doesn't. Sometimes, it means standing still and letting the truth do the damage it deserves. Today, my kids are adults. They have their own lives, their own opinions. I don't speak to my ex-wife anymore, not out of bitterness, but because that chapter is closed. She exists in my life only as their mother. Nothing more. Nothing less. And if there's one thing I've learned, it's this. Betrayal doesn't need revenge fueled by anger. It needs consequences delivered with clarity. Because when you cheat on your wife with mine, you're not just risking your marriage. You're gambling with your entire life. And sometimes, you lose. I didn't win because I destroyed someone. I won because I refused to let lies define my future. Justice doesn't always roar. Sometimes it whispers, and lets people destroy themselves. If this story hit you, leave a comment. Have you ever seen betrayal catch up to someone like this? Like, subscribe, and stay with us, because some lessons are learned the hard way, and some are taught.